Since Russia began its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, neighboring countries such as Belarus, Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia have been working hard to strengthen their borders. These nations know that if the war spreads, they could be the next targets. Among them, Lithuania has recently made a bold and unexpected move that has caught the attention of the entire world. It wasn't a political statement from the European Union or a military strike. Instead, it was a small nation taking a powerful stand for its own freedom and security. In northeastern Lithuania, near the border with Belarus, American and Lithuanian soldiers have been conducting joint military exercises. The training area is less than 10 miles from Belarus, and the atmosphere there is tense. Rows of tank barriers, known as dragon's teeth, have already been installed to block any possible invasion. These concrete obstacles stand as a symbol of defiance and readiness. Despite its small size, Lithuania is proving that it will not be an easy target. Lithuania is home to only about 3 million people, but its latest move has placed it squarely in the middle of Europe's defense strategy. The government has started constructing an enormous defensive barrier stretching roughly 48 kilometers along its border with Belarus and Russia. This project is being called a defense belt, and it includes fortifications, trenches, observation towers, and other military structures designed to slow down or stop an attack. At first glance, this might seem surprising. After all, Russia has not directly attacked Lithuania, and there has been no open conflict between the two countries. So, what has pushed the Lithuanian government to take such a serious step? To understand that, we need to look at geography and history. If you look at a map of Eastern Europe, Lithuania's position is both strategic and risky. The country lies on the northeastern edge of the European Union and NATO. To its east, it shares a long border, around 680 kilometers, with Belarus, a close ally of Russia. On its western side lies Kaliningrad, a small but heavily militarized Russian region separated from the rest of Russia. Kaliningrad is not just an isolated area, it is one of Moscow's most important military strongholds. It houses nuclear-capable missiles, advanced radar systems, and a major Russian naval base. This means Lithuania is surrounded by Russian power on two fronts, Belarus to the east and Kaliningrad to the west. In the event of a wider war, the country could quickly find itself trapped between two enemy forces. This geographical reality has been a concern for NATO planners for years, and it's one of the reasons why the alliance frequently holds military exercises in the Baltic region. The Lithuanian government's new defensive belt is a direct response to these dangers. It's not just about protecting territory, it's about sending a clear message to both allies and adversaries. The message is simple: Lithuania will not be caught unprepared. After seeing what happened in Ukraine, where Russia invaded and occupied parts of the country in a matter of days, Lithuanian leaders decided they could not take any chances. The war in Ukraine has changed how Europe thinks about security. Before the invasion, many European nations believed that large-scale wars on the continent were a thing of the past. But the destruction of Ukrainian cities, the displacement of millions of people, and the constant missile attacks have shown that old-style wars can still happen in modern Europe. Lithuania, being right next to both Russia and Belarus, knows it has to be ready for the worst-case scenario. The construction of the defensive belt is just one part of a broader plan. Lithuania has been increasing its defense budget every year since 2022, buying modern weapons, strengthening its army, and improving coordination with NATO allies. The presence of American troops near the border also shows that the United States views Lithuania as a vital link in Europe's defense chain. Joint training exercises help Lithuanian soldiers learn from experienced American forces and improve their readiness in case of real conflict. This effort is not only about military strength, it's also about national morale. For a small country that spent decades under Soviet control, freedom is deeply valued. Many Lithuanians still remember the years when their country was part of the USSR, when they had no control over their own destiny. That memory drives their determination never to fall under Moscow's influence again. The new defense line is a visible sign of that determination. Of course, not everyone sees it positively. Russia and Belarus have both criticized Lithuania's actions, calling them provocative and accusing the country of fueling tension in the region. But from Lithuania's perspective, the only real provocation came from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. If Moscow can invade one neighbor under false pretenses, what would stop it from trying the same with another? The Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, have all been sounding the alarm for years. They warned other European countries that Russia's aggressive behavior was not just a local issue but a threat to the entire continent. For a long time, those warnings were ignored or dismissed. But now, after 2022, few doubt the seriousness of the threat. The new defensive belt may not be enough to stop a large-scale invasion by itself, but it serves several important purposes. It slows down potential attackers, gives time for NATO forces to respond, and demonstrates Lithuania's will to fight for its territory. It also acts as a deterrent. Russia is less likely to attack a nation that looks well prepared. In addition to military measures, Lithuania has been working on strengthening its cyber defenses and improving energy security. Like many European countries, it used to rely heavily on Russian energy, but that dependence has been steadily reduced. Now, Lithuania is focused on building connections with other EU energy networks and investing in renewable sources. The goal is clear: to make the country resilient not only to military threats but also to economic and digital ones. For ordinary Lithuanians, the sight of soldiers training in fortifications being built near the border is both reassuring and unsettling. It's comforting to know the government is taking action, but it's also a reminder that peace in their region is fragile. Families living close to the border hear the sound of military drills and know that their country's safety depends on constant vigilance. In many ways, Lithuania's move symbolizes a broader change in Europe's mindset. The continent that once prided itself on peace and cooperation is now rearming and preparing for possible conflict. The defensive belt along the Lithuanian border is not just a wall of concrete and steel, it represents the resilience of a small nation determined to protect its sovereignty in the face of growing threats. For Lithuania, this is about survival, dignity, and freedom. It's a statement to the world that even a small country can stand tall when its independence is at stake. Whether or not Russia ever decides to test those defenses, one thing is certain: Lithuania will not face the future unprepared. Its people have chosen readiness over fear, action over complacency, and courage over silence. In today's uncertain world, that choice makes Lithuania not just a small country on the map, but a powerful symbol of determination for all of Europe. Somehow, Russia managed to position one of its most heavily armed fortresses right between Lithuania and Poland, the region known as Kaliningrad. This small piece of land, though separated from the rest of Russia, has been turned into a powerful military base filled with advanced weapons and missiles. Among them are hypersonic missiles capable of striking half of Europe in just a few minutes. This means that much of the continent is within Russia's reach, and Lithuania is right at the heart of that threat. What makes the situation even more alarming is how close Lithuania's capital, Vilnius, is to Belarus. The city lies only about 34 kilometers, roughly 21 miles, from the Belarusian border. If a missile were ever launched from there, it could hit Vilnius in less than 5 minutes. That's barely enough time for warning systems to react, let alone for citizens to take cover. And if Russian troops were to cross from Belarus into Lithuania, they could reach the capital in under an hour. These facts show how vulnerable the country's geography makes it, especially in the face of rising tensions between Russia and NATO. But Lithuania's worries don't stop there. There's another critical factor that makes this region so tense, something called the Suwalki Gap. If you look at a map of Eastern Europe, you'll see this small stretch of land, about 60 kilometers long, sitting between Poland and Lithuania. It may not look like much, but it's one of the most strategically important places in Europe. To the west of the gap is Kaliningrad, Russia's heavily armed exclave, and to the east is Belarus, a close ally of Moscow. This tiny corridor connects the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, to the rest of NATO through Poland. Here's why this is a problem: if Russia and Belarus were ever to coordinate and cut off this narrow strip of land, the 3 Baltic states would be completely isolated from their NATO allies. That means no reinforcements, no supplies, and no escape routes by land. In military terms, it would be like trapping Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia behind enemy lines. This isn't just speculation. Years ago, between 2014 and 2015, the RAND Corporation, an American think tank, conducted a series of war games to simulate what might happen if Russia invaded the Baltic region. Their findings were chilling. According to their simulations, Russian forces could reach the outskirts of Estonia and Latvia in just 36 to 60 hours, less than 3 days, before NATO could organize a meaningful response. That means Russia could potentially overrun the alliance's most vulnerable members before help could even arrive. Nearly a decade has passed since those studies, and the geopolitical situation has only become more tense. With Russia now engaged in a full-scale war in Ukraine and its troops stationed in Belarus, many military experts call the Suwalki Gap the most dangerous place in Europe. It's the spot where a future NATO-Russia conflict could most easily ignite, and where the outcome could determine the fate of Eastern Europe. Given all this, Lithuania's recent actions, building fortifications, increasing troop presence, and strengthening its defense line, make complete sense. These moves are not born out of paranoia, they are shaped by cold, hard geography. The country understands its position on the map leaves it little room for error. If war ever breaks out, Lithuania would be on the front lines. That's why its leaders have chosen to act now, rather than wait until it's too late. By fortifying its borders, Lithuania is not just protecting itself, it's reinforcing NATO's entire eastern flank. It's a clear message to Moscow that any attempt to move westward will be met with strong resistance. However, this defensive effort is not being carried out blindly. Lithuanian planners have taken a deep look at history to understand what works and what doesn't. History is filled with examples of walls and fortifications that failed to stop invasions. One of the most famous examples is the Maginot Line, built by France in the 1930s. After World War I, France was traumatized by the destruction it had suffered. Determined to avoid another invasion by Germany, it spent billions constructing a line of massive fortresses, underground tunnels, artillery bunkers, and barriers along its eastern border. The Maginot Line was considered an engineering masterpiece of its time. The French believed it would protect them from any future German attack. But history had a cruel twist in store. In 1940, during World War II, the German army didn't attack the Maginot Line directly. Instead, they went around it, through Belgium, bypassing the expensive fortifications entirely. Within weeks, France was overrun. The lesson was clear: even the most impressive walls can fail if the strategy behind them doesn't adapt to reality. Lithuania's military experts have studied these lessons carefully. They know that a physical barrier alone won't stop a modern army equipped with drones, long-range missiles, and cyber weapons. That's why the new Lithuanian defense belt is more than just walls and trenches. It's a complex network of surveillance systems, anti-tank barriers, and quick response units designed to slow down invaders and buy time for NATO reinforcements to arrive. Unlike the French Maginot Line, Lithuania's defenses are flexible and mobile. They are being built with the idea that warfare today is fast and unpredictable. Drones can strike from the sky, missiles can hit from hundreds of miles away, and cyber attacks can paralyze communication in seconds. So Lithuania's defense system combines physical barriers with digital and strategic readiness. There's also a psychological factor at play. By openly building these defenses, Lithuania is sending a message of strength and determination, both to its own citizens and to Russia. It reminds the Lithuanian people that their government is taking concrete steps to protect them, while warning Moscow that any aggression will come at a high cost. The people of Lithuania are deeply aware of the stakes. Their history under Soviet control is still fresh in national memory. Many families have stories of deportations, censorship, and the loss of freedom. That history fuels a strong sense of patriotism and a collective promise: never again will Lithuania fall under Russian domination. For Lithuania, this is more than just a military project. It's about national identity, survival, and pride. Each barrier built, each soldier trained near the border, is a declaration of independence. And while Lithuania is small compared to Russia, its courage and strategic importance give it an outsized role in Europe's security. The Suwałki Gap, once a quiet region known mostly to locals and travelers, has now become the focal point of global military attention. In the eyes of NATO strategists, protecting that corridor is essential to maintaining Europe's stability. For Russia, on the other hand, controlling it could mean splitting NATO's forces and reasserting dominance over the Baltics. That's why Lithuania's decision to strengthen its defenses is both a precaution and a warning. It's an acknowledgement that peace can no longer be taken for granted. The landscape of Eastern Europe has changed forever since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and countries like Lithuania are making sure they won't be caught unprepared. In the end, geography may dictate strategy, but determination shapes destiny. Lithuania understands that its position makes it vulnerable, yet it refuses to live in fear. Instead, it's turning its vulnerability into strength, proving that even the smallest nations can take bold steps to defend their freedom. France invested billions of francs in building an enormous line of fortifications along its northeastern border, a project known as the Maginot Line. It was named after André Maginot, France's Minister of War from 1929 to 1931, who championed the idea after the devastation of World War I. The purpose was simple: to make sure Germany could never invade France so easily again. At the time, it was considered a masterpiece of military engineering, a wonder of modern defense technology. The Maginot Line wasn't just a wall, it was an entire underground city designed to protect soldiers and keep them ready for battle. The fortresses were built with the strongest concrete ever used, and the artillery guns were larger and more powerful than any before them. Inside, the conditions were surprisingly comfortable for troops. The bunkers were air-conditioned, food quality was high, and soldiers even had recreation areas, sleeping quarters, and medical facilities. There were underground railways connecting different sections of the line, allowing men, weapons, and supplies to move quickly and safely. To the French military, it was the ultimate safeguard, proof that they had learned from the horrors of World War I. However, this nearly perfect structure had one major flaw, not in its construction, but in its planning. The Maginot Line covered the French-German border but left the French-Belgian border almost entirely unprotected. When the fortifications were designed, France and Belgium were close allies, so it didn't seem necessary to fortify that area. The French believed that if Germany ever attacked again, it would have to come through the heavily defended frontier, and Belgium would serve as a friendly buffer zone. But this assumption turned out to be a fatal mistake. In 1936, Belgium decided to declare itself a neutral country to avoid being dragged into another European war. That meant it was no longer bound to support France, and suddenly, the French-Belgian border became a potential entry point for enemy forces. Adolf Hitler recognized this vulnerability immediately. When Germany launched its offensive, Hitler didn't attack the Maginot Line head-on. He knew it would be almost impossible to break through its thick walls and heavy artillery. Instead, he used it as a distraction. German forces staged a small fake attack along the fortified line, drawing French attention and resources to that area. Meanwhile, the real invasion came from the north, through the Netherlands and Belgium, exactly where France had left itself exposed. In May 1940, the German army executed one of the most daring and effective strategies in modern history. Instead of avoiding natural obstacles, they went straight through the dense Ardennes forest in Belgium, a region the French military had considered impassable for tanks because of its steep hills and narrow roads. But the Germans proved them wrong. With fast-moving tanks and coordinated air support, the German forces broke through the Ardennes and crossed the Meuse River. By May 10, 1940, they had invaded Belgium. Within just a few days, German forces had smashed through the Belgian defenses and were advancing toward France. On May 12, they attacked the northern edge of the Maginot Line near Sedan. From there, the German army swept south and west, completely bypassing the main fortifications. By the time France realized what had happened, it was too late. The Maginot Line, which had cost billions and taken years to complete, was suddenly useless. The Germans didn't need to destroy it, they simply went around it. Once they had flanked the French defenses, they attacked from behind, rendering the entire line irrelevant. French troops inside the bunkers, who had prepared for a frontal assault, were cut off and surrounded. The Germans' speed and mobility left France's rigid, static defenses completely obsolete. What happened next was devastating. Just 6 weeks after the invasion began, France surrendered. It was one of the fastest military defeats in modern European history. The fall of France shocked the world, especially because it had one of the largest and best-equipped armies at the time. The lesson was clear: even the most advanced fortifications mean nothing if your enemy doesn't play by your expectations. When news broke that the Germans had reached Holland and were already deep into Belgium, French leaders were stunned. They couldn't believe that the supposedly impenetrable Maginot Line had been so easily bypassed. People across Europe asked the same question in disbelief: how on earth did they manage to do that? The answer lay in strategy and flexibility. France had relied too heavily on a defensive mindset, believing that walls, bunkers, and barriers could stop a modern army. Germany, on the other hand, used speed, coordination, and surprise. Their blitzkrieg strategy, meaning lightning war, combined tanks, aircraft, and infantry in a fast-moving assault that overwhelmed defenses before they could respond. While France was prepared for a slow, traditional war like World War I, Germany was fighting a new kind of war. The Maginot Line became one of history's greatest examples of misplaced confidence. It wasn't that the fortifications were weak; in fact, they performed exactly as designed where the fighting reached them. The real failure was in assuming that the enemy would attack where you expect them to. France learned that lesson the hard way, and it cost them their freedom for years. For modern countries like Lithuania, this story holds powerful lessons. Fortifications and defenses are important, but they must be flexible and supported by good intelligence and mobility. Lithuania's new defensive belt along its borders is being designed with these lessons in mind. Instead of building a static wall like the Maginot Line, Lithuania is focusing on a dynamic system, one that can detect threats, delay attackers, and adapt quickly to new kinds of warfare. The French mistake in the 1930s reminds the world that geography can't be changed, but strategy can. Relying on old methods in a new kind of war is a recipe for disaster. Lithuania's planners understand that modern warfare involves drones, missiles, and cyber attacks, things that no concrete wall can stop alone. Their approach is to combine physical defenses with intelligence sharing, electronic warfare systems, and coordination with NATO allies. The story of the Maginot Line isn't just a tale from the past, it's a warning for the present. It shows that even the strongest walls can fall if nations don't think ahead. That's why Lithuania and other NATO countries are preparing for every possible scenario. They know that in today's world, defense isn't about hiding behind walls, but about being ready to move, adapt, and respond before it's too late. France's fall in 1940 stands as one of history's most powerful reminders that security is not built on concrete and steel alone. It is built on awareness, preparation, and the willingness to learn from past mistakes, lessons that Lithuania seems determined to take to heart. Since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, countries near its borders have been racing to strengthen their defenses. Lithuania, a small nation of about 3 million people, has taken bold steps that show how seriously it views the danger. In the northeast, American and Lithuanian troops have been training less than 10 miles from the Belarusian border, and long lines of anti-tank obstacles known as Dragon's Teeth have been placed to slow any armored attack. Lithuania has built fortifications, observation posts, trenches, and quick response units to make itself harder to invade. The goal is not to stop an invasion alone but to slow it down so allies can arrive. Geography explains why this small country is acting so decisively. Lithuania sits on NATO's northeastern edge between Belarus and the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad is heavily militarized and hosts missiles and naval forces that threaten much of the region. Vilnius, Lithuania's capital, lies less than 34 kilometers from Belarus. A missile fired from Belarus could reach Vilnius in under 5 minutes, and ground forces could reach the city within an hour. That short warning time makes defense planning urgent. Between Kaliningrad and Belarus is a narrow corridor called the Suwalki Gap, only about 60 kilometers long. It links the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, to the rest of NATO through Poland. If that corridor were cut, the three Baltic countries could be isolated from land reinforcements, supplies, and heavy equipment. Military planners have long warned that the gap is a weak point in NATO's eastern flank. Years ago, war games run by the RAND Corporation suggested that Russian forces could reach the outskirts of Estonia and Latvia in 36 to 60 hours, faster than NATO could move large reinforcements by land. With Russia now engaged in Ukraine and its forces operating in Belarus and Kaliningrad, analysts call the Suwalki Gap one of the most dangerous spots in Europe. Lithuania's new defenses aim to protect that corridor and to make any attack more costly. History offers lessons about the limits of static defenses and the value of flexible planning. The classic example is the Maginot Line, the massive French fortification built after World War I, named for the minister who championed it. The Maginot Line was an engineering marvel filled with modern bunkers, artillery, underground railways, and comfortable living spaces for soldiers. It was designed to stop a head-on invasion across the French-German border. But the French left the Belgian border relatively unprotected because Belgium had been their ally. In 1940, Germany avoided the line by moving quickly through Belgium and the Ardennes, regions the French had considered difficult for large mechanized forces. The Maginot Line itself performed where it was attacked, but the enemy bypassed it, and France fell within weeks. That failure showed that a rigid, single line can be defeated by clever maneuver, and that overconfidence in static defenses is dangerous. More recent conflicts offer different lessons. In 2022, Russia built an extensive defensive system stretching from its border with Belarus into Ukraine. This network was not a polished fortress but a brutal, practical mix of trenches, minefields, anti-tank ditches, dragon's teeth, wire, artillery positions, and prepared kill zones. It was designed to halt momentum and make any advance costly. When Ukraine launched counteroffensives, their best tanks and trained units advanced into these defenses only to be slowed to a grind. Every meter cost lives and equipment, armored columns were ripped apart by mines, engineering vehicles were destroyed while clearing routes, and infantry faced constant fire. The result was a slow, bloody attrition that showed the power of a layered, simple defensive system. Lithuania's planners have studied both the failures and successes of the past. They understand that a fancy, static wall can be bypassed or rendered irrelevant, while a layered, flexible defense can stall attackers, inflict heavy losses, and buy time. That is why Lithuania is building what experts call an elastic defense, multiple layers of obstacles, ambush points, observation posts, and mobile reserves that can channel enemy forces into prepared kill zones. The purpose is not to win a decisive victory alone but to delay an invasion long enough for NATO reinforcements to arrive and for political responses to take effect. Lithuania has advantages that France lacked in the 1930s. Public willingness to resist is high. Polls show many Lithuanians are ready to defend their country, and civil defense programs are expanding. Volunteers learn to operate drones, set ambushes, and use forests and local terrain to their advantage. That popular readiness strengthens the country's defenses and raises the cost of occupation. Defense efforts extend beyond physical barriers. Lithuania has steadily increased its defense budget, purchased modern weapons, improved training, and coordinated closely with NATO partners. It has also worked to reduce reliance on Russian energy by building links with other EU networks and investing in renewables, and it has strengthened cyber defenses and intelligence sharing to protect communications and critical infrastructure. These moves reduce the range of hostile tools an adversary could use. Not everyone agrees with every step Lithuania takes. Russia and Belarus complain that these measures are provocative, but many in Europe now see such preparations as sensible after witnessing the speed and destructiveness of the war in Ukraine. The message Lithuania sends is practical: readiness deters surprise and makes aggression costlier. Building effective defenses requires a clear understanding of geography, technology, and history. Lithuania's strategy blends deterrence, preparation, and public resolve. It seeks flexible, layered defenses instead of a single static line, invests in people and systems, and focuses on cooperation with allies. That mix can turn a vulnerable position into a stronger posture. In an uncertain Europe, Lithuania's actions show a small country taking control of its fate. Its defenses are not a sign of fear but of determination, an insistence that independence will be defended. The Suwałki Gap, Kaliningrad's missiles, and Vilnius's short warning times are real threats, but so are the lessons of history and the resolve of a nation prepared to resist. If Lithuania's strategy succeeds, it will not only protect its own land but also strengthen NATO's eastern flank and remind the world that even small countries can make themselves hard to conquer. Lithuania stands ready. The wall isn't just concrete and steel, it's a mindset. Lithuania has no illusions about what Moscow might do if an attack succeeds, so this defense is as much about willpower as it is about obstacles. The plan stretches for roughly 50 kilometers along the border with Belarus and reaches back about 45 kilometers into Lithuanian territory. The idea is to create an invisible wall made of successive layers of resistance, a system that slows and channels any enemy advance instead of relying on a single rigid line. Planners divided the whole system into 3 main tiers. The first layer sits roughly 5 kilometers behind the border checkpoints. It will be heavy on short-range measures, anti-tank ditches and obstacles, minefields, fortified strongpoints and trenches, and secondary defensive positions. That first belt is designed to stop or at least blunt the first push of armor and mechanized troops. The second tier extends another 15 kilometers inward and contains features meant to complicate movement and logistics, drainage and earthworks, engineer parks for clearing and repair, bridges that have been prepared for demolition, and blocked approaches to key crossings. The last echelon mirrors the previous layers but adds local measures like roadside trees cut and felled to block or slow movement along forested roads. Fallen trees are a simple but effective way to constrict armored columns and force them into narrow routes where defenders can target them. This layered, flexible approach is deliberately different from building one massive, static fortification to be defended to the last bunker. Lithuania's planners have studied history and recent conflicts and drew 2 overriding lessons. The first lesson, from the past, is that static, glamorous fortresses can be bypassed. The classic example is the Maginot Line, a huge, sophisticated French defensive system built after World War I that seemed unbreakable until an enemy simply went around it. The second lesson, from recent conflicts, is that a crude, layered network of mines, trenches, anti-tank ditches, and prepared kill zones can dramatically slow an opponent and bleed them of momentum and equipment. A fast, modern offensive depends on moving quickly. If you deny that speed, the attack turns into a costly slog. As soon as Lithuania announced the defense belt, Moscow reacted. Russia and Belarus staged large-scale military exercises called Zapad 2025, the biggest joint drills the 2 countries had held for years. For 4 days, between September 12 and 16, cruise missiles flew over the Baltic Sea, air squadrons scrambled near NATO's borders, and electronic warfare units tested jamming systems. Officially, Moscow called these drills defensive in nature, but the political signal was unmistakable: you build walls, we sharpen our tools. Belarus publicly boasted of about 13,000 troops participating, but Lithuanian intelligence noticed inconsistencies in the official story. Some units apparently slipped deeper into Belarusian territory or moved in ways that made it harder for outside observers to track their true disposition. The danger in such ambiguity isn't that the numbers are wrong on paper, it's that the uncertainty hides capabilities and intentions. If battalions can be shifted quietly into position, a cross-border surge could happen in hours rather than weeks. That prospect is what keeps planners awake at night. Lithuania's defense is built to exploit time and terrain. The layered system does not expect to stop a massive invasion forever. Instead, it aims to slow and channel attackers, inflict attrition, and by crucial time, days or weeks, for NATO reinforcements and political responses to mobilize. The goal is not immediate victory, it is to make any occupation so costly and slow that it becomes politically and militarily unsustainable for an invader. That's a fundamentally different strategic aim than trying to hold a fixed line at all costs. Another key part of Lithuania's advantage is its people. In a way, France in the 1930s lacked this resource, a population ready to sustain prolonged resistance. Surveys and local experience show that many Lithuanians are prepared to resist if necessary. Civil defense training is spreading, volunteers learn to operate drones and reconnaissance tools, local communities practice ambush techniques and improvised defenses, and residents are being taught how to use the forests, fields, and towns as defensive terrain. When a population is willing to fight and when volunteers know how to slow an aggressor, that multiplies the effectiveness of fixed obstacles and formal defenses. Urban and rural environments become traps for mechanized formations that expect to move unopposed. Lithuania's planners also emphasize mobility and integration. Static barriers are paired with rapid response units, observation posts, and modern surveillance systems. Drones, sensors, and electronic monitoring feed information to mobile reserves that can strike or withdraw as needed. Engineers trained to lay or clear mines, demolish bridges, or reopen routes are embedded in the plan. The combination of technology, prepared terrain, and skilled troops aims to keep the initiative at the defensive side, spot the attacker, shape his routes, then bleed him on ground that favors the defender. Beyond the physical defenses, Lithuania has worked to reduce other vulnerabilities. Energy resilience, cyber defenses, and alliance coordination are all part of the package. Reducing dependence on external fuel or power and shoring up communications reduces the leverage an adversary might use without even firing a shot. Close coordination with NATO partners increases the odds that reinforcement, logistics, and sanctions can be activated quickly and coherently. The defense belt is therefore not an isolated national project, it's a node in a broader, multinational posture. There are critics who call such measures provocative, and Moscow predictably frames them as threats. But the simple reality is geography and precedent. Lithuania is flanked by a heavily militarized Russian exclave to the west and a close Russian ally to the east. Kaliningrad's missiles and Belarus-based forces reduce warning times and make the region inherently risky. Given those facts and the lessons of past conflicts, a cautious, layered defense that prepares the population and coordinates with allies is a rational response, not hysteria. In short, Lithuania's wall is a modern approach to defense, multi-layered, mobile, and integrated with civilian resilience. It rejects the false security of a single, static line and instead builds depth, flexibility, and social will. If it works, it will not only complicate any aggression, it will change the calculus of risk for an aggressor who must now weigh heavy losses, international response, and a population unwilling to be occupied. The real strength of the wall may be that it turns vulnerability into a source of resilience and resolve. Back in 2022, Lithuania took a bold step that angered Moscow. Following European Union sanctions, the Lithuanian government decided to stop certain goods, like steel and iron ore, from being transported by rail through its territory to Kaliningrad, the Russian enclave sandwiched between Lithuania and Poland. For years, around 100 trains from mainland Russia had passed through Lithuania daily under a 2004 agreement that allowed these shipments. But once Lithuania enforced the sanctions, those trains carrying restricted materials were no longer allowed to pass. Kaliningrad was heavily dependent on these shipments. It relied on the transit of metal, coal, gas, and oil from mainland Russia to sustain its industries and population. So, when the ban took effect, Russia immediately lashed out with harsh warnings. Moscow threatened Lithuania with serious consequences that could directly affect its citizens, and it didn't take long for those threats to manifest in various forms. Soon after the transit ban, Lithuania was hit by a wave of bomb threats that paralyzed public life. Schools, airports, and government offices had to be evacuated several times. Around the same time, a massive cyber attack struck the country, disrupting networks and essential services. Although Moscow officially denied involvement, cybersecurity analysts believe the attacks likely originated from Kaliningrad-based networks, pointing to Russia's typical hybrid warfare tactics, mixing intimidation, cyber warfare, and psychological pressure. The fear at the time was that Russia might escalate the situation militarily by seizing the Suwalki Gap, that narrow 60-kilometer stretch of land linking Poland and Lithuania. This corridor is NATO's weakest point in Europe, and if it fell, the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, would be cut off from the rest of the alliance by land. Thankfully, no invasion occurred, but the entire episode served as a chilling reminder of how fragile peace in the region really is. Fast forward to 2025, and the same pattern is repeating itself, only this time, it's under the guise of Zapad 2025, Russia's large-scale military exercise with Belarus. These drills are officially described as defensive, but everyone knows their real purpose is psychological warfare. They are meant to intimidate Lithuania, to make its people nervous, and to test NATO's reaction. For 4 tense days, Russian cruise missiles, fighter jets, and electronic warfare units operated close to NATO borders, as if rehearsing for something much larger. But the intimidation doesn't stop at ground drills or political threats. The airspace over the Baltics has become another front. Russian drones are increasingly appearing over Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Some are spotted and tracked, some mysteriously disappear, and others crash, sometimes inside NATO territory. Every one of these incidents serves a dual purpose: probing NATO's radar coverage and reaction times, and keeping the local population on edge. Lithuanian and NATO officials know that these drones aren't random or accidental. They are deliberate acts of psychological pressure. They test how the alliance responds and how quickly it scrambles aircraft or alerts its forces. Each overflight, each buzzing drone, sends a message: we can reach you anytime. This constant background tension wears on public morale and forces NATO to spend time, resources, and focus on unpredictable, small-scale incidents that could suddenly spiral into something far worse. And Lithuania isn't the only one facing this kind of harassment. The 2 other Baltic states, Latvia and Estonia, have been experiencing similar provocations. On September 19, 2025, Estonia reported one of the most serious violations yet. 3 armed Russian MiG-31 fighter jets deliberately entered Estonian airspace. This was not an accident or a navigational error, it was a calculated move meant to test how far Russia could go before triggering a formal NATO response. Estonia's foreign minister condemned the act, calling it a blatant breach of sovereignty and territorial integrity. Predictably, the Kremlin denied any wrongdoing, dismissing the incident as Western propaganda. But such denials have become a pattern. Every time Russia crosses a line, whether in the air, on the ground, or in cyberspace, it simply denies involvement and claims the West is overreacting. Over time, this strategy erodes the sense of outrage. By constantly pushing the limits and then pretending nothing happened, Russia normalizes the abnormal. What would once have been seen as an unacceptable act of aggression becomes, gradually, just another incident. This is the new kind of warfare: slow, psychological, and relentless. Instead of tanks rolling across borders, it's small, steady acts of pressure designed to exhaust and divide. And that's why Lithuania's construction of a fortified defense line isn't paranoia, it's a calculated act of necessity. Geography has trapped the Baltic states in a vulnerable position, wedged between an aggressive Russia and a heavily armed Kaliningrad. So, preparation isn't optional, it's survival. But there's something even larger happening beyond Lithuania's individual actions. The line it's building along its border with Belarus isn't an isolated project. It's part of a much broader defensive effort stretching across the entire eastern edge of Europe. This regional initiative, sometimes referred to as a modern Iron Curtain, aims to create a continuous chain of defense across NATO's eastern flank, from the Black Sea to the Baltic. Poland, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, and even Ukraine are all participating in similar efforts. Together, they're constructing trenches, anti-tank barriers, observation posts, and layered defenses designed to slow any future Russian advance. This massive undertaking has been informally dubbed the Second Iron Curtain. But unlike the Cold War version, which divided Europe politically and ideologically, this one is being built physically, on the ground, to protect against a potential invasion. The idea is simple: make it as hard as possible for Russian forces to repeat what they did in Ukraine. Every country along NATO's eastern border has seen how Russia operates: rapid, coordinated assaults, followed by waves of disinformation and cyber attacks. The new defensive line is meant to complicate that strategy by denying the element of surprise and forcing any aggressor to fight through layers of fortifications before reaching major population centers. For Lithuania, this second Iron Curtain isn't just about building barriers, it's about building confidence. By standing firm and coordinating with its neighbors, it sends a message that the era of vulnerability is over. Any attempt to invade or intimidate one Baltic state would now face resistance not from a single small nation, but from an interconnected wall of defenses supported by the full strength of NATO. So, when analysts say that Europe is constructing its last line of defense, they're not exaggerating. The stakes couldn't be higher. What Lithuania and its allies are building may very well determine whether future conflicts are contained, or whether the continent once again slides into war. It's not just about concrete, trenches, or drones, it's about deterrence, resilience, and unity in the face of a growing threat. The first Iron Curtain fell decades ago. The second one is rising, not out of ideology, but out of necessity. The entire Baltic region is now uniting in a historic effort to protect itself, forming what many experts are calling the Baltic's second Iron Curtain. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, three small nations with painful memories of Russian occupation, are locking arms and turning their borders into one vast defensive network. Their message is clear: they will never again be caught unprepared. Estonia has taken one of the most ambitious approaches. It's developing a massive 100-kilometer defense zone along its eastern border with Russia, stretching up to 40 kilometers inland. This zone isn't just a fence or a few watchtowers, it's a complex system of fortifications designed to make any invasion incredibly costly. The plan includes up to 600 bunkers strategically placed across the borderlands. Even if not all are immediately built, Estonia has already started stockpiling materials nearby so they can be assembled quickly if tensions rise. Each bunker will be fitted with reinforced firing positions, anti-tank barriers, and interconnected trench systems. Around them, there will be fields of mines and tank traps meant to stop or redirect Russian armor. By 2027, Estonia expects to have dug 40 kilometers of anti-tank ditches, built inside a web of dragon's teeth, barbed wire, and reinforced strongpoints. The purpose of all these obstacles is to slow down enemy movement, forcing any attacking army into narrow paths where they can be trapped and destroyed. This entire setup reflects a brutal but realistic calculation: if war ever comes, Estonia won't be able to stop Russia immediately. Its main goal will be to buy precious time for NATO reinforcements to arrive and for Allied forces to coordinate a response. Every minute an invading tank column spends stuck in a minefield or funneled through a choke point could mean more lives saved and a better chance of survival for the Baltic states. But Estonia isn't only preparing for a land invasion. The country is also reinforcing its coastline, especially along the Gulf of Finland, which separates it from Russia. The sea, just like the land, poses a serious threat. If Moscow ever decided to attack from the water, Estonia wants to make sure its forces are ready. Coastal fortifications, artillery positions, and naval barriers are being prepared so that any enemy approaching by sea would face resistance long before they could reach the beaches. What makes Estonia's preparations even more impressive is the speed at which they're being carried out. These aren't vague plans for the distant future, they're happening now. In places like Vilnius and other eastern villages, half-kilometer sections of defensive trenches and obstacles have already been completed. Local engineers are mapping future strongpoints, setting up supply depots, and training units to defend them. This urgency shows that Estonia no longer believes that deterrence or diplomacy alone will protect it. They're planning for the worst and making sure they're ready to fight if it comes to that. Latvia, Estonia's southern neighbor, is taking a slightly different but equally determined approach. Rather than focusing on one continuous defense line, Latvia is creating multiple layers of resistance designed to slow, confuse, and destroy any invading forces. Across its eastern border, Latvia is building choke points, narrow passages that would trap Russian tanks and vehicles, and backing them up with anti-armor traps, hidden artillery positions, and overlapping fields of fire. The idea is simple but deadly: every road, every open field, could become a killing zone. Latvia's strategy also takes advantage of its natural landscape. Unlike Ukraine, where open plains allow for wide tank movements, Latvia is restoring its marshes and wetlands in the eastern peatlands to serve as natural defenses. These waterlogged areas make it nearly impossible for heavy vehicles to move quickly. Tanks would have to travel through narrow dry paths where defenders can easily target them. The wetlands, in effect, become a weapon, forcing the invaders into predictable routes where they can be ambushed and destroyed. At the same time, Latvia is strengthening its artificial defenses. At more than 20 key locations along its border, engineers have already installed anti-mobility barriers, including dragon's teeth, pyramid-shaped concrete blocks that stop tanks, HESCO barriers filled with earth, and coils of barbed wire. These defenses are not randomly placed, they're carefully positioned based on the terrain to block or redirect Russian movements before they can gather momentum. Latvia has also made a major political shift that shows how seriously it's taking the threat. In April 2025, the Latvian parliament voted to withdraw from the Ottawa Convention, an international treaty that bans the use of landmines. This decision was not made lightly. Landmines are controversial because of their long-term danger to civilians. But Latvian officials argued that given their country's position on the front line with Russia, they could no longer afford to limit their defensive options. Rejoining the global mine ban, they said, could be discussed later, after the threat of invasion was no longer looming over them. This move highlights the level of fear and determination driving the Baltic states today. To outsiders, these fortifications might seem extreme. To the people living there, they're a matter of survival. The Baltic nations know exactly what it's like to be occupied by Russia. For half of the 20th century, they were under Soviet rule, their languages suppressed and their citizens deported to Siberia. Those memories haven't faded. They've shaped the mindset of an entire generation determined never to experience that again. For the Baltics, defense is not just about weapons and bunkers, it's about psychology. Every fortification built and every soldier trained sends a message to Moscow, we are ready. It's also about unity. The defenses being built in Estonia connect to those in Latvia and Lithuania, creating one continuous barrier from the Gulf of Finland to the Polish border. NATO troops, particularly from the United States, the United Kingdom, and Germany, have been rotating through these areas, training local forces and sharing technology. This level of cooperation ensures that if one country is attacked, all others can respond instantly. The scale of the regional effort is unprecedented in modern Europe. What started as Lithuania's attempt to build a single defensive belt has evolved into a coordinated effort by the entire Baltic region. It's no longer about one country defending itself, it's about an alliance building a shield for the entire continent. Military analysts are already calling this massive network the Second Iron Curtain. But unlike the old Iron Curtain, which divided East and West ideologically, this new one is purely defensive. It's not meant to separate people, it's meant to stop tanks. Its purpose is to ensure that democracy in Eastern Europe can survive even in the face of renewed aggression from Moscow. The new Iron Curtain is being built not out of concrete walls or barbed wire alone, but out of cooperation, shared intelligence, and an unshakable will to resist. Each bunker, trench, and minefield represents a statement of defiance. The Baltic states have chosen not to wait for help, they're preparing to hold the line themselves. To Russia, this growing network of defenses might look like provocation. But to the Baltics, it's a declaration of freedom. They've seen what happens when you rely on promises instead of preparation. So now, as they dig trenches, reinforce borders, and harden coastlines, they're not just building defenses, they're building a future where no one can ever again decide their fate for them. Lithuania's wall isn't just made of concrete and steel, it's also built from a mindset shaped by fear and realism. The country knows exactly what Russia might do if it ever tried to break through. The wall represents both a physical and psychological defense. It stretches over 50 kilometers, covering nearly the entire border with Belarus, and goes about 45 kilometers deep into Lithuanian territory. The goal isn't to create a visible, single structure but to build several layers of resistance, an invisible wall meant to slow down or confuse any invading force. The defense line is divided into 3 zones. The first zone, located just behind the border control area, spans 5 kilometers and includes anti-tank ditches, minefields, fortified trenches, and backup positions. The second tier, which extends another 15 kilometers, features drainage ditches, engineering equipment stations, bridges set up for demolition, and blocked bridgeheads to stop enemy vehicles. The third and final zone follows a similar design but also includes roadside trees that can be quickly cut down to block roads. Fallen trees are surprisingly effective at delaying enemy movement, especially in dense forest areas. Predictably, Russia didn't take this news well. The wall and other defense measures directly challenge Moscow's idea of dominance in the region. Within days of Lithuania's announcement, Russia launched Zapad 2025, its largest military drill with Belarus in years. From September 12 to 16, cruise missiles were fired over the Barents Sea, Air Force squadrons scrambled near NATO borders, and electronic warfare units practiced jamming communications. Officially, Russia called it a defensive exercise, but the real message was clear: if Lithuania builds walls, Russia will build battering rams. Belarus bragged about having 13,000 soldiers involved, but Lithuanian intelligence quickly noticed inconsistencies. Some troops were positioned deeper inside Belarus, being quietly rotated in and out to hide their true numbers. The danger wasn't just in the size of the forces, it was in the uncertainty. Nobody knew exactly how many soldiers were ready for rapid deployment. The ambiguity itself was a weapon, meant to keep NATO guessing and nervous. This tension between Russia and Lithuania isn't new. Back in 2022, Lithuania blocked the rail transit of steel and iron ore from Russia to Kaliningrad, following EU sanctions. Kaliningrad relied heavily on those supplies, which came by train through Lithuanian land. When the ban went into effect, Russia immediately threatened Lithuania with serious consequences. Soon after, Lithuania faced a wave of bomb threats and a major cyber attack, which many analysts believe originated from Kaliningrad. Some feared that Russia might even try to seize the Suwalki Gap, the narrow corridor connecting Poland and Lithuania, to escalate the crisis. Thankfully, that didn't happen, but the threat was real enough to leave scars. Fast forward to 2025, and Russia is once again using intimidation tactics through Zapad 2025. It's psychological warfare, aimed at making the Lithuanian people feel small, anxious, and vulnerable. The tension doesn't stop at the borders or railways, it reaches the skies, too. Russian drones have been seen flying over the Baltics more often than ever. Some crash, some vanish, but they all serve one purpose: testing defenses and spreading fear. Estonia and Latvia have reported similar airspace violations. On September 19, 2025, 3 armed Russian MiG-31 fighter jets deliberately entered Estonian airspace. The Kremlin, as usual, denied responsibility, but it fits a pattern. Russia pushes boundaries just enough to normalize its aggressive behavior. Now, Lithuania's wall isn't an isolated project. It's part of something much bigger, a collective defense initiative across the Baltic region. Analysts are calling it the Second Iron Curtain. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are all working together to strengthen their borders, determined to prevent history from repeating itself. Estonia, for instance, is building a massive 100-kilometer defense zone along its eastern border, stretching up to 40 kilometers inland. The plan includes 600 bunkers, minefields, anti-tank ditches, and reinforced firing positions. These aren't future blueprints, they're already being built. In some villages, trenches and bunkers are already complete, showing that Estonia isn't waiting for deterrence alone to protect it. They're also reinforcing their coastlines to guard against possible sea invasions through the Gulf of Finland. Latvia's strategy is slightly different but equally tough. The country is constructing choke points, hidden artillery positions, and natural barriers designed to trap advancing forces. Latvia's terrain gives it an advantage. Marshes and wetlands can slow down tanks and vehicles, forcing them into narrow areas where defenders have the upper hand. Over 20 locations have already been fortified with dragon's teeth, concrete blocks, and barbed wire. And recently, Latvia made a major legal move. It withdrew from the Ottawa Convention, which banned the use of anti-personnel mines. This decision gives Latvia greater flexibility to use defensive minefields in case of conflict. It's controversial but strategically important. Beyond physical defenses, Latvia is upgrading its military technology. The country is acquiring HIMARS rocket systems, coastal defense missiles, and modern air defense systems. They're also improving transportation routes to move troops quickly. The strategy is simple: obstacles slow down the enemy, and advanced weapons finish them off. But Lithuania's wall, despite its ambition, faces serious problems. The cost is huge. Over €150 million has already been spent, and the project isn't even complete. Critics argue it's too expensive for a small country of just under 3 million people. However, most Lithuanians see it as necessary insurance. They know that appearing weak can invite aggression. Still, there's a harsh truth: walls don't win wars, armies do. And the combined military strength of all three Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, is less than 80,000 troops, including reserves. Russia, even after years of fighting in Ukraine, can still field over 1 million soldiers, not to mention private military groups and Belarusian allies. The numbers just don't compare. This is why NATO's role is so crucial. The troops currently stationed in the Baltics aren't there to stop Russia, they're tripwires. Their purpose is to signal an attack, not to prevent it. If Russia ever invades, these soldiers would likely be overrun quickly. Their sacrifice would trigger NATO's Article 5, which states that an attack on one member is an attack on all. Then, NATO's major powers, the US, Germany, France, and others, would step in. But this plan depends heavily on time. It would take days, maybe weeks, for NATO to mobilize reinforcements and move them across Europe. Lithuania's wall, in this context, isn't meant to stop Russia, it's meant to buy time. Time for NATO to react before the Baltics fall. However, this strategy comes with a worrying question: what if NATO hesitates? Article 5 has only been used once, after September 11th. Would every NATO country risk a massive war, possibly even nuclear escalation, to defend Lithuania? Would countries like Hungary, with close ties to Moscow, agree to fight? It's a gamble Lithuania knows it has to take. Germany has promised to permanently station 5,000 troops in Lithuania by 2027, and Poland is building its own massive Eastern Shield defense line worth $2.5 billion. These moves show commitment, but also fear that NATO's eastern flank remains fragile. Lithuania's geography doesn't help, either. The country is flat and open, with few natural barriers. If Russia breaks through the first defense line, it's a straight road to Vilnius, the capital. Still, the Baltic nations refuse to be victims. Their new walls, trenches, and bunkers are not just about defense, they're a message. They've learned from history, from occupations, and betrayals. They know that freedom isn't guaranteed, and they're willing to dig, build, and fight to protect it. Whether the wall holds or not, it stands as proof that small nations can still show immense courage in the shadow of giants.